Our next presentation is Adam Croston, and Adam is from RealScan 360. But before RealScan, he was at Magic Leap, and he is a software engineer slash AR developer. And we're gonna sit down and have a chat. And Kara, thank you for coming out. Yes. Awesome.
Yeah, so mainly I'm on the technology side of things, so really a software developer at heart, but touched on many other areas. Most of my background's been making 3D video games for about the last 20 years. So actually, even 20 years ago, the first video games I was making were full 3D games, and so my head's been in that space for a very long time.
What are you currently working on, Adam?
I currently work for a company called Rescan, employee number 1, tech director there, and we are doing extremely rapid, large-scale architectural scanning. So we walk through spaces, and when we're done walking through them, we have a full 3D model of the space, full color, full 3D model of space.
Are there other, it sounds kind of like, so does it automatically convert it into an AutoCAD or a 3D file?
Yeah, it does all that kind of stuff. But
very cool.
Can't talk about that too much. We're still in quasi still.
Okay. So the reason that I brought Adam on here is because we had a chat. We met up. John Adams, again, Mr. John, recommended that I speak with Adam when he was I know Adams. Actually, John Adams' first name is John, so this is John Adam too. We have presidents of the United States here tonight, but from like 2,000 years ago. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, we met up, and my mind was like, wow. This man has so much information that we need to understand in order to pay attention to those little details about like face mapping and tracking and all the different points. And what I found was so fascinating was the talk that when you talked about the different points on the face and how we find the common denominator. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's kind of just one of my like pet curio things, is all about faces and facial beauty and things like that. It's quite interesting if you do kind of mathematical analysis of human faces, you find that you can really boil down most people on Earth's face down to about 12 floating point numbers that will uniquely identify them. And if you use those 12 numbers in the right way, you can kind of regenerate their face almost perfectly. So if you take Arnold Schwarzenegger's face and you boil it down to these 12 parameters, and then you take these 12 parameters someplace else and you use that to regenerate the 3D model, everyone recognizes that's Arnold Schwarzenegger's face. And this applies for even like less well-known people and even slight differences between two individuals. There's mathematical techniques you can use to do that. You usually start by doing either 3D scans, or you do kind of direct physical measurements like, width of lips, eye height, eyebrow lengths, things like that. Usually when you try to measure a face in that way, you have to take a lot of measurements before you get to the point where you can uniquely identify two faces, like up in the number of like 70 different measurements before you can really tell two people apart. But if you take those 70 measurements and you do a technique called principal component analysis on that space, you really quickly find that most of those measurements are kind of combinations of these vectors in the high dimensional space, in the 70 dimensional space. So if you take the most important direction in that point cloud, 70 dimensional point cloud, that's the most important facial space vector. You keep doing that, you take the next second most important, next third most important, and by the time you've done about 12, the amount of error that you would get between one and another is tiny. So
you just keep iterating and keep iterating. Yeah, it sounds like that kind of.
And in fact, Apple purchased a company called FaceShift, and FaceShift is really cool. And FaceShift would do this kind of an analysis of people's faces based on a depth image, and that's now built into the iPhone. Is that technique? So.
What do you think of the emojis and the emoji faces and all the animal faces?
I don't know about the emoji side of things, but I think this kind of ability to kind of retarget facial animations onto anything is going to be really cool and really especially important once we move to full heads-up AR. So with full heads-up AR, I can appear like a dragon, and I can make sure that as I do facial expressions, the dragon's facial expressions are mine. So you can see, any sort of expression, anger, or happiness, or sadness, or whatever, through that dragon. And not just a little head floating on a phone screen, a full 3D dragon that you can see if you're wearing the special magic glasses.
With like a whole body you're talking about. I thought we talked about machines and how machines would be simplified in the future. I found that also really fascinating. Help me think of another adjective besides fascinating. Exciting. Wow. Help me out. Huh? Stimulating. Riveting. Engaging. Okay. Now, anyway. So so we were talking about like how washing machines wouldn't have knobs in the future. Yeah. What other cases and why would that be?
So a lot of people think of augmented reality as this thing you see through your phone right now. You hold up your phone, and if you point it at the right spot on the ground, you can see the Pokemon sitting on the ground there. You see a picture of the ground on the phone screen. Pretty quickly, that's going to change. As soon as you have things that are more like HoloLens, but a lot better, then the number of applications and the types of things you can do greatly expands. Your hands are free to do other things, which means you can operate machinery safely while you still have the augmented content in front of you. There's all sorts of things that open up. You can potentially have a set of applications that are allowed to run when you're driving, but none of the others are. So why would you look down at a little screen that has a map on it when you could just follow the yellow brick road? So heads-up AR is really an entirely different beast than the kind of AR people think of when you look at a phone. Now that said, developing for them is not that different. So you can really use a phone to develop these apps right now.
Can you give us an example of heads-up AR? What is heads-up AR versus
HoloLens is heads-up AR.
Okay, and what else?
So the trouble with HoloLens is it has incredibly narrow field of view and a kind of terrible user interface. So.
Well, we can help them, right? Yeah.
It's a great first step, and they made huge strides. So I'm not dissing them in that.
Doesn't Lenovo have an AR headset as well?
There's actually dozens and dozens of AR headsets available right now. Of varying quality, varying fields of view, varying brightness, varying levels of built-in tracking. So
let's talk about tracking. So that seems to be something that I noticed when you guys open up an AR app, and then it's like finding the space. I get lazy. I'm in bed. I'm looking at the app, and my lights are down, and I'm like, oh man, I have to turn the lights on to use this. I'll use it later. But is there any case where you can actually have enough? Like, what does light have to do with?
Yeah,
with tracking and mapping everything.
So there's a lot of different ways to do tracking. With a phone, you're using the phone's camera to achieve, and the phone's IMUs to achieve that tracking. So with things like a HoloLens, it's using a set of kind of texture projectors and cameras to see. Like a HoloLens in the dark works. You could actually be in a pitch black room and it's still gonna track perfectly well because it's shining out light you can't see. Your phone, though, doesn't usually do that. So most people's phones in their pockets don't have an IR emitter on the back. So they're limited to using kind of visual, the type of light that we can normally see with our eyes. So if you're in the dark, there's nothing for it to see. It just sees blackness. And tracking works by locking on to kind of these intransient features. So generally things that are called corners in computer vision, but they tend to also be physical corners in the real world, or they just tend to be changes in color and texture. And it locks on to unique points that could be viewed from multiple angles. And the more of those unique points it sees, the better the tracking is. And this leads to a kind of thing that happens. You could even be in a really wonderfully bright room, but if it's a perfectly flat white wall you're facing, there's no features to lock onto. And if there's no features to lock onto, you're going to lose tracking pretty quickly. When you have no features to lock onto, you're using the phone's inertial measurement unit to guess where you're at. And that works for a very short period of time, but after a while it drifts.
Okay. I wanted to open this up to the audience because we have a lot of really smart people here tonight, but we have to get the microphone over there. So,
Microphone?
yeah. Do you want to pass it along? Okay. And then.
Hi.
Well,
Yeah. This is Dave from Geopogo, and I'm an architect. And you talked about working with architects, and so I'm really interested in what your experience was like and what you learned from that.
So far, I personally have been working for the last year for two people who are both involved in architecture. They're the founders of the company that I'm working for. One is an architect, and the other has been involved in the kind of real estate business for many, many, many years. So I really like working with architects. It's a super multidisciplinary field, so you get people who can think across boundaries in really cool, weird ways. I don't know if that's your question, but I like working with architects. I find them to be very, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, so right now, I've been working with scans of already existing buildings. So not so much kind of the conceptualization or the kind of laying down of ideas of things to build, but of really capturing places that already exist. And you know, that unto itself is a challenge, but it's a very different challenge than helping create kind of this ideation and visualization for somebody who wants to create something new. They can be used together, though, of course.
So, Adam, you were at Magic Leap prior to RealScan.
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know. It's just like in my head, it's like Rescan. Maybe because that's another company. So you're at Magic Leap prior to RealScan, and you've been in the AR space for a long time. What is the most magnificent AR experience that you've had?
Ooh.
Or something that really stands out. It doesn't have to be the best of the best, but what are a really, really good experience?
Okay, I'll be honest here, but I'm not trying to toot my own horn. Yeah. One of the best AR experiences I made was just a true, proper 3D music visualizer that floats on top of a table and is fully 3D and interacts with the music in real time. So instead of it being kind of static or even like a small animated character, it was very alive. It's changing from moment to moment. You know, it allowed you to even gain insights about what was going on in the music. So like that kind of interaction where it's like almost a data visualization, for me has been the coolest stuff. Seeing life-size characters standing in front of you that look like real human beings is a really amazing experience. One of the simplest things is just is when you get a web browser working and pull full heads up 3D, it's awesome because you're just like, oh, I'm going to put a video on that window over there and an application over here and a drawing application over here, and you have them all floating in space around you. And not necessarily actually that practical, but in terms of like a first wow experience, it's really cool.
Okay. Question. You could talk and then we'll repeat it. What is the best AR product you've ever seen? We kind of just asked that in a way.
In terms of products, the
yeah.
best AR product I've seen.
Does anybody else have an idea of what are some of the products that you guys have seen out there that you can share?
IKEA's is pretty.
IKEA's? Oh.
Functional and it's built to make e-commerce work.
Oh, that's yeah. So that's a staging furniture type of like a
Something
yeah.
I've seen before, but just executed from the perspective of someone who doesn't really know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a good example right there, and I'm sure you have like. I think they mean like more like functional.
I actually forget the name of the actual product, but it's just a measuring tape.
There's a lot of them on there, but the one that does it right has like doesn't make you click outside. It's easy to click, and
But
the
it's
less
kind of
points,
like something that
Yeah.
in the future, everyone's going to have on their phone because it's useful.
Yeah,
And,
for sure.
some people may have the IKEA product, some people may have, these other things, other games, other types of experience. But when you look at something like that, you're like, oh, that's like the notepad of AR. It's going to be the thing that everybody has on their phone.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of neat.
Also, this Sky Guide, right? Like what is it called, the Star Field, or
the star fields. Most people don't think of that as an AR app, but it really is. The ability to look up at the stars and just see where the constellations are and things like that.
I think the company added AR at the end of their later. I didn't remember it being Starfield AR until recently, but we've had that app for a while where you point your phone up and you look at the sky and it tells you about the constellations and gives you facts. But it uses a different technology. It doesn't use cameras. It uses
the IMU, and it uses the magnetometer in the IMU.
The GPS, right? Or no?
It uses the GPS to know where on the planet you are, because that changes what the constellations look like. But it uses the time of day as well to know where the constellations are rotated, and it uses the magnetometer to know what direction you're facing as far as global north is concerned.
Interesting.
So, and of course, it uses the IMU to update that view in real time, really fast. So,
okay. We have
no visual cues are used.
No visual cues, so it's all built into the system.
It shows how clever you can be with limited resources if you really think
and
about
it still looks really cool. That app is like, wow. It's from like 8 or 9 years. It's from a long time ago.
Yeah.
So okay, back there. Oh, that's fine. You already have the mic. Go ahead.
What kind of experiences do you find most lend themselves to being a good UX AR designer? Like when you're recruiting UX AR designers, for example.
UX AR designer.
Yeah. Where are you looking? What kind of backgrounds?
I would be looking for people who've developed good 3D UX in games. Game development that's proper 3D really lends itself to it. If you've done VR applications, it really lends itself to it. There's not a lot of people who, who have done a kind of AR applications. But if that person has done AR applications, I would want to see them. I would want them to show them to me. And you can tell a lot by kind of, even if they've chosen something, big and sprawling and it doesn't quite work, or if they've just chosen something small and sweet and it works perfectly. So I would.
Are you looking more for visuals though, or more for somebody who thinks of a system, or?
I would be looking for, considerations for how people would use the given application.
Mm-hmm. So it's usability testing and
really,
things like
really
that.
how usable is it?
Yeah, how usable.
The visuals can always be prettied up after the fact. You can always swap out 3D models for other 3D models. But if it doesn't work, you're not even off the ground.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have time for one more question, and it's right up here. We're going to go right up here.
Hi. So
can you use the microphone, please? Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering, where do you see the future of AR for education, specifically like K-12 education and maybe the technical education vertical? Like, where do you see that going? And have you done anything in that space yet?
Yeah, I've done a little bit, and it's going to be awesome. The ability to like even so one of the things I would do is I feel that to have the broadest kind of penetration for those types of AR application apps, you can't target heads-up glasses. You have to target phones. And if you're targeting phones, one of the things that really helps to make application development easier is to go for a tabletop paradigm. It's a thing on top of a table. And as you walk around, you get different views and perspectives on that thing. And the nice thing is if you can lock onto that table in a consistent way, you can make sure, even without multi-user or really good positional tracking, you can make sure everyone gets the same correct view. They're seeing the same thing. And there's a couple companies that are producing content. It's escaping me at the moment. I would, otherwise we can try and add it to the notes later. But I've seen some applications where they basically have like a cutaway of a volcano, and the volcano is just on top of the tabletop, roiling away. And other kids can all walk around it, and they see the outside of it, and then they walk around the back, and they see the internals of the volcano with the magma chamber underneath. And you can show that in a book as a picture, but it's so much more engaging to the kid, and they can like really zoom in and look at the details, like, well, what's going on there? And they can talk about it amongst each other because they're all seeing the same thing at the same moment.
Yep.
So.
That was great.
Cool,
Yeah,
thank you
that's
so
awesome. Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, great job. Great job. All right, guys. Give us just a minute, and we have a surprise for you. We have a magic show. Yeah. I know. Well, I already told them. They already know.